Okay, thank you very much. We are only running 10 minutes late, which I have to say I think is very adequate in the Commission sense of the word. Now, you will see on your programmes next, we have here to talk to us about Safe Cities, Gemma Clavell. She was indeed, once upon a time, a policy analyst and researcher at the University of Barcelona, but since then she's been more busy as the founder of Eticas Research and Consulting, and this year was the finalist for the EU Women's Innovator Prize. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you so much. Hello, good afternoon. I hope you're all recharged on chocolate and sweets. I wanna open the scope of the day a little bit. As Jennifer mentioned, I run an organization called Eticas, which is both a company and a foundation, and we have the very humble goal of changing the course of technology. After working in this field for several years, I've come to the conclusion that things cannot keep going on as they have been going on until now. The things we're doing with data and with data-intensive technologies are just very irresponsible, to say the least. So we're trying to see how would we go about that? How would we do this? And we work on many subjects: forensics, biometrics, drones, algorithmic transparency and discrimination, etc., in different services, responsible data commons, you name it. But the issue of security and cities is still very close to my heart because I did my PhD. I wrote my PhD on CCTV, on video cameras on streets. And one of the things that I found, among lots of others, was that CCTV was not useful in terms of stopping crime or preventing crime, but it was useful in terms of winning elections. So with my PhD, what I learned was to start inquiring technology in different ways and trying to always ask for what for me is a fundamental question, working on policy. How do you put questions and answers in relation? So what I do when I work with technologies, I take a gadget or a solution, and I say, so if this is the solution, what was the problem? And what I want to tell you today is that oftentimes in security technology particularly, but not only, this link between problems and solutions is very oftentimes lost. Talking about safe cities is a very broad theme. I was just trying to put together a list of things that I may need to discuss today, from police work to crime, policy elements, and the issue of public space and the urban experience. And as you can see, there's a long list of things that are happening in that space. So let me just start first with security, and then I'll move on to cities. My challenge here is to narrow down the scope of what we talk about. Let me go into this later. First point for me, and I'm going to highlight 3 points. I'm trying to help the person drawing here. I'm going to highlight 3 points on what I think are some of the dynamics that we find in security technologies that are also overlap and happen in other spheres. But I think it's quite crucial to understand that this is happening. First is link between problems and solutions. This is a map published by a magazine in 2010. The last time someone tried to get on a plane and exploded. You may remember it was a plane leaving from Amsterdam going to Detroit. The person in the end only managed to exploit his own underwear. And you see a picture of the underwear down there. But luckily he was not successful. As a policy analyst working in the field of security, when things like this happen, you start asking questions and following up the news and trying to work out what happened and what went wrong. How come someone with a record could get on a plane and try to fly to the US? The days after, we learned that the father of this person, who was originally coming from Nigeria, had reported his own son for links with Al-Qaeda. Back then, Al-Qaeda was still the main threat, not ISIS. Then we learned that this person was actually in a database, but that no one had done any investigation. And so no one upgraded him to a no-fly list because nothing happened. So this person was on this very general, very broad database that did not make it to Amsterdam airport and the Dutch or European authorities. So after several days passed, once we realized what had happened, if you ask me what was the problem, I would have said an intelligence problem. We had a very large database that didn't go anywhere. We did not have enough resources to investigate on the people going into that database. So what should the solution be? Better intelligence, more resources for police to do their work. Interestingly, that sounds like common sense, but that was not what the EU authorities came to the conclusion. They decided that the solution to this was full body scanners. And so since 2010, we've had full body scanners in several airports, in what has become a relative failure over time, because they're not in all airports. They raised a lot of privacy and security issues as well. But it's interesting that back then, if you limited yourself to the analysis of what happened, would have needed an intelligent solution, the authorities went for a flashy, gadget, new technology solution. That keeps happening. In the field of security, the relationship between problems and solutions is often, too often, lost. And so the need for problem-driven solutions is more urgent than ever. And really, I encourage you to take any gadget that you use, any solution, any algorithm, and ask yourselves, if this is the solution, what was the problem? If this is the answer, what was the question? I dare you to do that, because oftentimes you will not find a relationship between one and another. And this thing which happened with full body scanners happens over and over again. Another dynamic that I find in security technologies, there's a lot of vaporware going on. There's a lot of people selling vaporware. I understand some people build business models on thin air, hoping to make a quick buck, but there's a lot of buying vaporware. There's a lot of, not only companies, but also public authorities buying technology that does not do what it's supposed to do. So we find technologies that don't work as they're supposed to do, companies that make false claims. We work a lot on facial recognition, for instance, and we still have facial recognition systems that identify faces on T-shirts and not the actual person. It was on the news not that long ago that a facial recognition system mistook Bin Laden for Winona Ryder because they have a similar bone structure. So we may get there one day. We may get to the point where we have systems that automatically recognize people, but we're not there yet. We also have companies promising to develop the algorithm of radicalization. And there's been a lot of money being put in the last 10 years in doing that. So someone thinks that if you can identify what grade you got in math when you were 6, together with the neighborhood you come from, together with something else, that means, you will be a terrorist. And for some reason that is beyond my understanding, people are buying this kind of promises, not really solutions. There's also companies claiming that they can identify suspicious behavior. And of course, suspicious behavior is also the behavior of anyone who's not like us. And us is a very narrow definition of what is normal. We see more and more systems that see us as a white, middle-aged man. And any way of moving or acting that does not reflect that is considered suspicious. So in a bank setting, in a banking institutions where you go and withdraw money and talk to your representative, whatever, when I use a bank, I don't have a lot of time, so I just go in and out very quickly. That's normal. Well, there's also old people who might go to the bank and want to spend a long time talking to the person managing their money. It may be raining outside. Bank headquarters are usually very large. They have couches, so people might take more time. This is what systems more and more label as suspicious. Anything that it's not how the people building the systems look like. And that is indeed a problem, because we only find out about these issues once the systems are already in place. And so we're coming up with very narrow definitions of what is normal and what is not normal. So we have technologies that don't work as they're supposed to do because of those false claims. We also have technologies that are not operated as they're supposed to do. We keep forgetting about the human element. There's so many companies and institutions and public authorities buying technology, thinking that with signing the expense sheet, you're already there. You bought the technology, it's there, people should use it. Well, not really. If you don't train people to use the technology, if you don't involve them oftentimes in the process of defining what kind of technologies you want to use, they will not use them properly. And we see this over and over again. And not only with commercial or consumer technologies, also with technologies affecting fundamental rights. We see that at borders, for instance. We're automating border crossing, and the amount of money being spent on training border guards is close to zero. And so that also affects the experience of the people using those technologies. There's also organizational issues. These technologies are changing the workforce. If technology is incorporated into your work will change. And if people don't take you into account, if people don't train you, if people don't give you a way out, if you just find yourself becoming obsolete for a long period of time, you'll grow resentful of that technology. And we see that happening over and over again, and especially in police settings. No one's taking care of the frontline policemen and women. We're just completely forgetting this human element. So again, you may have good technologies, but you're just not planning for implementations, which is a huge issue in policy design. We also have a lot of vendors that minimize the problems of their technologies. Issues of interoperability. We've seen over and over again how organizations buy new systems, and then when they have them, they realize, actually, this system doesn't talk to my existing systems. And by the time they've done that, the money is gone and the system becomes obsolete or not useful because of that. There's also cases when those selling or advertising technology don't show the risks of those technologies. We see a lot of social media solutions for crisis management, for instance. I dare you to go into any police station and ask them, how do you use these really flashy softwares that you've bought to make sure that all your data from the CCTV systems and all your data from incidents and all your data from incoming calls matches Twitter data and Facebook data and any other social media? They will probably tell you what they keep telling us. In the end, we don't use it. Because social media comes with some truth, but also a lot of fake news, a lot of irony, and those systems, in a lot of different languages, and those systems are not prepared to deal with that. So in practice, all those technologies just don't have an impact in the workplace. The impact they've made the managers spend a lot of money on solutions that are not that useful. But also, we never evaluate. And so all these things that I'm telling you about, we see them when we work on different projects related to the security sector, but we haven't yet come across a system that has its own evaluation at its core. So when you buy technology, the normal thing would be for you to establish when would you assess whether that works or doesn't work. We don't do that. We just buy new technology, we implement it, and we just leave it there. In rational terms, you'd expect someone after 12 years and 24 months, after 1 year, 12 months, or 24 months, 36 months, to go back and being, so how is it working? What do we need to improve? Do we need to invest more, invest less? Do we need to change the software? No one is doing that in the public sector, and specifically in security. So this is a recipe for disaster. So I mentioned first the relationship between problems and security and solutions, the issue of vaporware, and finally the issue of impact. No one's thinking about impact. And here's where I wanted to broaden the scope. GDPR is great, and software and solutions to address your GDPR needs are fantastic. But you also need to understand the impact of the things that you are developing. And in security, that's not really happening. So when we have a police force come to us and say, we want to use apps, we want an app to make sure that people find it easy to communicate with us. We want to be at their fingertips. We want them to be able to call us without even dialing the number. We want them to be able to take pictures and send them to us. Well, where's the line between between police collaboration and a telltale society? How do you build trust if you're telling your own citizens, be vigilant, be careful, watch out what you see, and tell us, the police? So what are fundamental values that we like to pretend that we uphold when we're going for these kind of technologies? And more importantly, who is asking these questions? Is anyone thinking about the long-term impact of these technologies? I'm I'm part of several WhatsApp groups, for instance, dealing with security at the local level. And you'd be amazed. After several months, most of those groups become groups where neighbors only report on anyone who looks different or who's not from that village. I've had to live through WhatsApp conflicts of people saying the picture that you just sent to the police is my own child. And just because you don't know them doesn't mean they're doing anything evil. And so you just see a lot of the stereotyping that goes on in society being policeized because of these new technologies. And no one's thinking about this kind of impacts. There's also, we're transitioning from a logic of prevention to a logic of prediction. And that's fairly scary, especially when all our budgets keep going more and more to prediction and less to prevention. We are convinced that if we have enough data, we'll be able to predict the future. And as you know very well, all we can do is make good guesses on the basis of past information. A good guess is not the future. And if all our resources go into prediction, we forget about the very crucial job of prevention. There's also the issue of making problems worse. Oftentimes we think, okay, so we have a problem. People steal. So if people felt that we're looking at them, that they would get caught, they would steal less. Let's install CCTV. Okay. Do you think, did anyone ever thought 20 years ago when the first cameras went up for public safety, did anyone really think that petty theft was going to disappear? Of course not. It adapts. You create a new system, and criminality adapts to the new system, in the same way that criminals adapted to the existence of the police. So you create CCTV, and then criminals all of a sudden wear helmets or cover their faces. And so in the end, and that's pretty tragic, what you have is that you've spent a lot of money on CCTV, theft continues, but in a new way, but also you lose the possibility of citizen collaboration because no one can see the perpetrator. Before, because they would not cover their faces because they did not expect CCTV, at least you could rely on other citizens who may have seen who they were or how they looked like. So in the end, after this whole process, oftentimes we're in a worse position than we were at the beginning. We have tools to see that happening and to foresee that before it happens. We have tools to mitigate the impact of technologies in asking for crime to get better. And yet, we don't put them to work. There's also the issue related to this of the erosion of trust. And it's interesting that there's so many solutions out there that use trust as their main thing, even in their name. Trust is a fundamental value. Societies run on trust. Contracts are just pieces of paper that are based on trust. Many of the technologies that we're using are eroding that trust while pretending to uphold it. And finally, there's the issue of fundamental rights. We've been assessing smart borders at the global level. You may know that the EU is changing fundamentally the way that we do border control. We're automating border crossing, incorporating not only algorithms, but also biometrics. And so we've been assessing how this biometric capturing works in third countries. So we've spent over a year in Africa, Asia, and Latin America looking at how they're actually working. It's interesting because this study was paid by the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, and we found ourselves being the first ever people to assess how smart borders is functioning. One of the things that we found is that through biometric borders, your identity is no longer in your passport. Your identity is in your fingerprints. And you may think, well, it makes no difference, and it's actually safer because you can't get rid of your fingerprints. Exactly. You cannot get rid of your identity. So up until a few years ago, if you were a migrant and wanted to hide your identity, sometimes for legitimate reasons, you would burn your passport. When your passport is your body, what do? You burn yourself. So we're seeing more and more people burning their fingertips because of this. We could have foreseen this. We could have seen that this would be a normal evolution of the incorporation of fingerprinting to control borders, but no one did. We should have assessed as a society if that's a risk that we want to take. We should have put in a scale if we want the increased security of biometrics coming at the price of fundamental rights and people fundamentally changing their relationship to their bodies. But surprisingly, we didn't. We don't seem to be able to learn when it comes to technology. There's also, and before I jump on cities, this idea that vendors and many people keep promising that if only we could see everything, we could stop all the evildoers and we could make the world a better place. There's a fantastic line by Richard Sennett, the sociologist, who asked if cities had eyes everywhere, if cities had cameras, if everything could be seen, where would Romeo and Juliet fall in love? Do we want to live in societies where Romeo and Juliet, because they come from two rival families, cannot fall in love? The dark spots of our societies are also to fall in love, to develop your sense of autonomy, to be able to reinvent yourselves. Where have we had the debate of what kind of cities do we want? So let me jump now to cities. Cities are a great place to visualize what happens with technology. We did this for an exhibition about 3 years ago called Big Bang Data. We were asked to map where all the data processes happen in a public space. We also included some public spaces, as you can see on your left. And here you see the massive interaction between public and private data capturing points. You also see the overlap between safety and security, and external security and internal security. So basically in cities, all these concepts that are part of our constitutions, that theoretically are different, that have different safeguards and guarantees, get all messed up. And so one of the things that we're finding with big data policing is the blurring of the lines between private and public, between internal and external. We also often forget, and Joe mentioned this morning, that anything that is smart, and we talk a lot about the smart city, anything that is smart is surveillance. And so if it's surveillance, that it needs to be aware of its social, legal, and ethical impacts. And I think that people have realized that before the regulator. Some cities have had to remove smart bins, smart telephone booths. Google Glass, most of its controversies were when Google Glass was used in public areas. So I think we've seen how society is not very happy with cities becoming these very intense spaces of surveillance. But so, in the context of cities and security, who's thinking not only about privacy, but the whole taxonomy of social impacts of technology? Who's thinking about autonomy, dignity, freedom of assembly, association, and expression, freedom of movement, discrimination, social integration, due process of law, presumption of innocence, trust, or equality of treatment? And how do we build that in the systems that we create for cities and for safety? Unfortunately, instead of reviewing all these things, incorporating them in the technology, we keep going for security theater, and we keep buying more technology that is visible instead of technology that actually can work. And the crucial thing for me is that when we think about technology for cities, no one seems to be asking what should be the main initial question. So you want to improve security in a city? Okay. What makes people safe? Start there. It's that easy. And if you ask that, you'll find, and that's what all the data tells us, that security has a lot to do with equality, with quality of life, with cohesion, with trust. Then on the basis of this diagnosis, let's build technology that promotes all these elements that we know lead us to feel more safe and more secure. However, what technology offers us is completely the opposite. It's not just that they don't address these issues, it's that what we get offered is completely the opposite. We are offered control, We are offered a very disturbing panopticon dream on cities. We're offered a very narrow understanding of security, which is very linked to what we in policy call end of the pipe. When you have a pipe, and the pipe is throwing out things that you don't want, you have two options. You can block the exit, or you can go to the source and make sure that things don't go in the pipe. So we distinguish between end-of-the-pipe policies and policies that actually address problems. In security and technology, we keep going to the end of the pipe. And the problem with the end of the pipe is that you can hold your hand against the pipe for a limited period of time because the pressure is too high. We don't have the resources to put our hands, our social hands there for a long period of time. At some point, someone needs to go up there and ask the right questions, or we'll become exhausted as a society. But what technology seems to offer us is just these end-of-the-pipe solutions, or just making problems worse, as I mentioned before with CCTV and how crime adapts. What we found that seems to work in safe cities is traditional policing. And this is not flashy. You will probably not end up in the cover of a magazine by saying that you're investing more in traditional policing because it's not shiny, it's not a gadget. It cannot be called smart, but actually, it is the definition of smart. So just to finish, what can we do? We can start by asking the right questions. One of the things that we did with my team, because we work on so many different technologies, was say, okay, we need to make sure we have the same perspective. And we looked at what our clients wanted, we looked at the legislation, and we came up with a framework that seems to work. And in our framework, yes, we look at legal issues, but also at ethical issues. Yes, we look at data management, but also, and look at the main batteries in the middle, we look at desirability and acceptability. So we look at individual issues linked to acceptance, and at collective issues linked to desirability. Before you develop anything, you need to ask yourself a crucial question in policy. What do I need, and will this solve my problem? And what happens if I don't do anything? The do-nothing alternative, when trying to come up with something new, is so crucial. Maybe you don't need to invest all that money. So asking the right questions is crucial to escape the theater. We also need the right people on the table. You can't think about desirability, acceptability, ethics, and data management with just one IT person or just one lawyer. You need a lot of people with different profiles on the table in order to come up with the right solutions. We also need to come up with solutions that make sense. How do we make security technology responsible? I've heard that so many times. Like, IT people need to understand that dignity needs to be at the heart of the new technologies. Well, what does dignity ever mean to an IT person? Whoever trained IT personnel in these kind of issues? No one. So I think that from the social sciences, we also need to get off our high heels of just trying to preach our own understandings of things on others. We need to understand technology better. Every time I hear calls for algorithmic accountability, I'm like, what does that even mean? If an algorithm is something that learns, how can it be accountable? I mean, I can get a company to show me the algorithm, but by the time I see the algorithm's changed already. When my bank stops my card because I used it somewhere, my bank knows that it's been stopped by the algorithm. My bank doesn't know why. Machine learning is about this. So let's stop asking impossible things from technology. Let's understand technology much better in order to be able to say things that make sense to the people that can build those responsible systems of the future. We need to evaluate technologies, and I emphasized that before. Desirability, we need to see whether something is desirable. We also need to define success. If you buy a new system, a new technology, think in 12 months, what do I want to see? What would successful implementation mean? And if in 12 months you're not there, rethink your investment or your decision, and invest, of course, in follow-up. And finally, and we see that over and over in our project, legislate for redress. When the information society goes wrong, people need to have a safety net, a place where they can fall back to, and where they have the right to redress. We need to be able to negotiate the impacts, legal, criminal, social, the legal impacts of these technologies. So I think, and I'll finish on this, I think that technologies can definitely make our lives, our cities, and our security much better, but I'm afraid that at the moment, they're failing to do so. So I hope we change that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gemma, and we're going to pick up, I think, on a lot of the points that you've raised in our next panel.